This is something old, but I think this is very useful as well. Now, what happens in here is that you got some very interesting features in Photoshop CC. And what you can see over here is a beautiful graphic. Now, as a photographer, you know, sometimes I could be forgetful, I could throw my bag over there and take a snap. And how do I remove objects like that, right? So, what you have previously is something called the Content Aware Patch tool. It's amazing that after so long, right, after so long, even after one and 2 years when we release CS6, there's still a lot of users who are still not sure and still don't know about things like Content Aware Move, Content Aware Fill, and stuff like that, right? Now, what happens then is I could use a very quick selection and I could use tools like this, where I say Content Aware Patch tool and I just drag this fella across and just do the fill up based on that, right? So let's say, imagine if I just do something like that and I do a deselection, I can fill it up nicely, okay? So simple features like this. But then again, in Photoshop CC, we introduced another interesting feature, alright, which is this, okay? So this is something that I find pretty cool, alright? How many of you guys don't have a Facebook yet? So you guys should have it, right? Okay? So we love to take pictures, okay? But at some point of time, when you use maybe your camera phones to take a snap, you could be moving around a bit, and then you get a bit of motion, you see a bit of ghosting, you see a bit of blurriness on the images itself, right? In Photoshop CC, we introduced something called camera shape reduction, okay? To put it in a simple term, like in Singapore, a lot of my customers always call it de-blur, okay? So if you look at this, what really happens in here is that with this image itself, I can go to filter, and under that selection, I can say under sharpen, you see something called shape reduction. Right? Now with the shape reduction, what really happens in there is that you can see here, this is the panel that's going to pop up. I'm going to define, firstly, of course, the area which has a lot of motion, a lot of blurred area. So I specify that area, you can see the bottom box area there. What then happens is, I got a small little detail window here. This is basically rendering a preview for you to see in certain areas what are some of the details that you're missing out. Right? Now to do a very quick comparison, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom this in. So this area, right? You can see over here, this is the difference. The original image on the left, which is all blurred out, compared to the one on the right. Okay? Now how easy it is to do it. I can also do things like this, for example, if I just want to roll over maybe to certain images or certain areas. I could just say, okay, let's bring this window across. I'm just going to drag this here, I'm just going to place this here, and you can see it's fixing the image up. Is this cool? Is it good? Okay, so I'll just close this window now. How do I do it very quickly without having to do anything else? Without any settings at all, I can just turn on my preview. I'll just focus on this area because I just want you guys to really notice this. If I turn on my preview here, there you go. See the difference? One more time. Blur, deep blur. Okay? So it's called shape reduction, not deep blur, right? So you can see over here, this is how Photoshop is working now. And now I have a very nice sharp image of my graphic. Okay? To show you a better example, so I was down in Phuket a couple of months back. I was down in a drink store trying to get a beer. I took this beautiful image of the menu and stuff like that. What really happens then is when you look at graphics like this, you are probably trying to figure out maybe, let's say you look at smoothies, for example. And then you see a small little text there, you're trying to figure out how many ounces is that, what's the name of the list and stuff like that, but you can't figure it out, right? So I'm just going to do the same thing again. I'm just going to turn on my shape reduction. Okay? And with this, I'm just going to switch this off, right? And what I'm going to do now is, because it's still rendering, I'm just going to pull this out, and I'll say, okay, let's just focus on this area, and tell me, what is that? Right? See a better example now? Okay? So if I close this down, and if I say a preview, you can see straight away it's fixing up the whole picture for you. Alright? It's cool, easy to do. Okay? Alright? So you can see there's a lot of, there's very minimal enhancements to this, but this is one of the most powerful ones that you see. And then of course you got graphics like this. Right? I'm just going to push it a bit. This is a HD projector, so I'm just going to run this. There's a new feature in there called Smart Sharpen as well. Right? So what really happens in there is I got a nice beautiful picture of this lady here. Okay? So you can see over here, right? I'm not sure whether you can see the difference there. Let me just zoom in to this area. Okay. Right, then you can see over here, I'm just going to focus on the eyes. Right? So what's really happening is, I'm basically trying to sharpen up some images, like what I have right here. You can see that on the original image itself, on the background, okay, I have an image, and at the exterior area of the face, you can see it's a bit blurry, there's a bit of motion here and there. What's going to happen then is I can turn on my Smart Sharpen, alright, and straight away you can see it's more defined, it's clearer. I can play around with the amounts and setting as well. It's a custom settings, you can set the radius, and then of course you set the amount of noise to reduce. And slowly you can start to see a very big difference in terms of what's really happening inside here, right? Something that's all blurred up like that, and then straight away it's all being sharpened up, right? You probably can see that clearly because, in terms of projector-wise, but when you try to figure out in terms of some of the sliders that you have over here, you can do very wonderful works with some of your photographs as well, okay? So this is something simple. Now, how many of you guys take high definition pictures, like camera raw and stuff like that? Okay, good. So if you look at this, I got a interesting picture here. And of course, when I launch a camera file, basically I get to see this whole panel opening up. We've added 3 additional features in there, alright, 3 tools. The very first one is, of course, the ever wonderful spot healing brush. That is already in After Effects in Photoshop and now in Camera Raw as well, right? So what can you do with this? So before you actually import the image into Photoshop, right? Imagine if I want to remove maybe just this zip line over here, okay? I can just use the spot filling brush, okay? And I'm just going to draw a small little area over here. And you can see that the line is gone. Now the main thing isn't that, because what happens then is there's a small little pin over here, which is in red, which is where you have selected. You can then drag the green little pin up and say, okay, it's not going to fill up with the mountain, it's probably going to fill up with the sky, right? And it'll fill that area up really nicely. Now, if I bring it across to the big zip line, you can see that there's a small little render coming up from there, right? So I can do simple edits like this in Photoshop Camera Raw, okay? And when I'm done, click on Escape, just relaunch that. And there's also another tool in there called the Radical Filter. Right? So this basically allows me to apply a filter and maybe set a focus point. So you can see over here, I can set a simple point like that, maybe on the character's face, okay, where I'm darkening that area and brightening the whole picture straight away without having to do all the settings that you see on the right hand side. Right? You can see over here as well, if I bring this across, or maybe if I hide it back, okay, this is the difference, and this is the original picture, okay? So very quickly, I just drag in that picture itself, I can just add in this kind of filters directly, right? And of course, Camera Raw is one of the key things in Photoshop. When you look at images as well, I'm not too sure if you guys know about this, but later on I'll show you something called, in the sneak peeks, I'll show you something called filters, right? Smart filters, okay? So with Photoshop itself, you can play around with some of these features, right? But I'm just going to run through very quickly because there's a lot of things to cover in InDesign and Illustrator, right? So one of the key things then in Illustrator, how many of you guys use Illustrator here? So we get some experts out here, okay? So if you look at this graphic or design over here, now, just focus on the word tropical, okay? How many of you guys know how to do this? Having the word tropical and then certain texts are like larger, some of them are rotated and stuff like that. You normally create one text, one layer, right? Right to do that? Okay? So what really happens in there is in Illustrator CC, we introduced a new tool called the Touch Tag tool. Alright, it's called the Touch Tag tool. Now, what happens then is that if I click on this text and I turn on my text tool and I say, okay, let's change this to my name instead, right? It's a whole text field. So what I can do here is I can only do a simple rotation or move the entire text field. I can move each individual letters here, right? But under the tools, under the text tool, when you zoom in, there's something called the Touch Tag tool, right? Now with this, I can then say, all right, let's go to letter E. I'm just going to be an arty-farty designer and start to convert my name and bring this across and say, okay, let's do this. And then from here, you can say, okay, let's do something like that. And then resize this. All right? So no more layers by layers. We only work with one single layer. And then of course you can see over here, okay, so this is only for the Illustrator folks, they love this a lot. Okay? You can see the homework load is cut down a lot, and you can see I'm just resizing. There you go. Right? Okay, so this is really very useful. I used to do the text fill by text fill and multiple layers that I had to manage, group them together, and all these long processes. But everything is now in one single layer. Right? Okay. And we also introduced something like that. So if you look at posters like this, okay, now what's interesting about this is that when you look at the vine area, right, if I draw a line like that, you need to create a vine, again, you need to create a pattern brush and stuff like that. It's a very long process for Illustrator users. You need to create a swatch panel, create that design, and make sure the line flows nicely, and then we use that line on the line that you draw. It's a very long process. Same goes for this as well. If you look at things like this, for example, where you have a sharp tooth around that area itself, how do you do it? Okay? I'm going to show you the easy way to do in Illustrator CC. Okay? So this is an old feature that you saw, I think it's probably in the CS4 we introduced it, we call it multiple artboards. So I have multiple project files in here. And what happens then is on my left hand side, I got the line that I want to draw, right? The nice design, the layouts that I have. In the center, I have an image that I have. I need to use this image on my line, right? You can see the last one on the right hand side is the final product. Now, how do I do it very quickly without having to go through the whole processes like creating my own tiles and stuff like that, right? I'll open up the brushes panel, right? You can see over here I got a few presets. I don't have the image in there. All I need to do is to just select this image, drag this in, and say, okay, let's select something called the pattern brush. Okay? Click on that and say, okay. So straight away you'll see this panel. I'm going to call it vines. Right? In here, there's a lot of features like things like this, for example, where it does auto-generated color tiles. I'll show you a better example later on after this. But what really happens then is you can see that the lines are all created for me nicely. Click on OK. So now with this line, what I can then do is if I drag this out and I say, okay, apply, there you go. So very quickly I'm applying it directly on the line. Right? Now, what happens then is if I need to change the flow or change the curve and stuff like that, what will happen to the image? Some of you guys might think it might be distorted, might not be too good looking and stuff like that. But what really happens in there is that you can see here, right? If I do something like that, something crazy like that, and I release, you can see that the line actually restores itself nicely. Okay? So simple things like this can be done. And then of course, when you look at images like this, now this is key because you got angles where you got corners and stuff, inward corners, outward corners and stuff like that. So if I have a pattern that was created, as I showed you earlier on with this in Illustrator CC, this feature called Show Auto-Generated Corner Tiles is all automatically created for you. So you don't have to do it yourself or specify yourself. Straight from here you can see that I have an auto slice, auto between. I can choose from here the original tiles, whether I want it to be auto-centered and stuff. It will give you a lot of previews for you to choose from. Okay? So you don't have to do everything on your own. Right? Okay. Alright, and then over here as well. In CS 5 and 6, we introduced something called the perspective tool. You guys remember that? Yeah. Yeah? Some of you guys do? Now what happens then is you can see over here I got a nice logo on the left hand side. If I were to take this logo and bring it onto the tag on the right, how do I actually skew it into perspective with the brown little cardboard that you see over there? Right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to turn this off and turn this on. So this would be my original scenario. Okay? Now, what happens then is there's this familiar tool that you guys always use called the free transform tool. When I switch that on, what then happens is if I select this image and I switch this on, you can see that there's a small little panel appearing on the left hand side or anywhere on the screen that allows you to do proper skewing in perspective. Okay? Meaning, if I were to do the simple free transform, you guys would know rotation, and then of course resizing like that. right? All these things can be done. But then again, what I'm trying to do here is when I switch this on, alright, and I say skew, straight away you can see from here, I'm basically skewing it like that. Okay? So I'm just skewing it based on my different directions that I'm rotating. The card is a bit tilted, so I just tilt it up a bit. And then from here, I'll just tilt it back down. Okay? And then I'll use the other perspective skew, and I'll just tilt it back up. Then from here, because you can see I'm using my tracker, so I can't really control that well. But from here, you can then start to place it and then do the re-skewing again and start to fit it up nicely in perspective. Alright? So very easily, you can just use this tool to start managing for you in terms of skewing perspective, your design, before you send it to your end users and your customers. So, alright? Is this cool? Right. And then I think one of the features that Paul showed earlier was something that I love a lot, which is having a little bit of love in the office between the designer and the web guys, right, which is the CSS properties, okay? So you can see that in Photoshop and Illustrator, there's a lot of small little tools that we are constantly releasing, right, and features that we're releasing as well. But what I really want to focus on also is in InDesign. So how many users of InDesign do I have? Okay, good. How many of you guys have been thinking about creating a publication viewable on the iPads or Android devices? Okay, have you guys succeeded? Some, a bit, okay? So I'm just going to switch over to my iPad. I'll show you some very wonderful examples here. Now what's happening here is that I have a